Again, welcome to the Genesis controversy and welcome to my channel, Apologetics 101. I'm your host, Brian Keith Bowen. In this next episode of the Genesis controversy, I will be continuing part 2 of my critique of the debate that Kent Hovind and Joel Edmund Anderson had. But I'm still editing out the video. I mean, I recorded it, but I'm editing it. I did a New Year's resolution video like really early this morning, right after or at least uploaded to YouTube by the time the New Year started. And I'm going to do another video. This one I'm calling it "What is Christian Mythicism?" Christian Mythicism is a term that I have coined a small movement of people who profess Christianity but take a position where they think Genesis chapters 1 through 11 is of the genre of myth or something similar to that. I believe Bill Craig uses mytho-history. Most of the people in this movement uses just the term myth. And I gave them the name the Christian Mythicists, or Christian Mythicism is the name of the position. There is some distinctions between hardcore mythicism and Christian mythicism. You know, like the fact that mythicists deny the historical Jesus and believe that Christians copied from pagan myths. And most Christian mythicists are probably wary about using the word copy when they talk about them employing the same genre. They think they're playing the same genre as myth. I think this is just a kind of a matter of semantics, but I'm not gonna go too much into that. But either way, Christian mythicists claim that Genesis 1 through 11 is of the genre of myth or similar. In case Craig, he argues mytho-history, or what he calls mytho-history. I'm very opposed to this movement. It's a small movement. It's not really big, but there are people in it. They're usually theistic evolutionists, and I say usually because I've never found one that wasn't a theistic evolutionist. As far as that part of this movement, I'm not saying all theistic evolutionists, take this position. I don't know if they do, but I do know all the ones that take Christian mythicist position are theistic evolutionists as well. So I think there might be a correlation between that, but I'm not going to explore that at the moment. But there is a difference between hard and soft Christian mythicists. Hard Christian mythicism or strong Christian mythicism, of course strong and weak and hard and soft are just relative to each other, but strong Christian mythicism basically denies everything in Genesis 1 through 11, believing that all of it is part of the genre of myth, and none of it is historically accurate or true. People that are strong Christian mythicists will tend to deny the existence of Adam and Eve and so forth. And soft, what I call soft or weak Christian mythicists, will acknowledge the existence of Adam and Eve, but they will deny at least the narrative part of the story as being literally true, and they think that the whole genre was part of this myth literature. And so I call them soft or weak Christian mythicists. Bill Craig would be a weak or soft Christian mythicist. Now again, these are just relative terms to each other, and I do think that both parties are extreme, both parties are wrong. But the strong Christian mythicist is a little bit more extreme than the soft or weak Christian mythicists, because they want to deny everything in Genesis chapters 1 through 11. So, but in any given case, I wanted to do a short video talking about that. But before we continue into the video, let's cue the intro. might wonder, why do I call this movement Christian mythicism? Well, they argue a lot like a mythicist. They look at myth literature and then they try to find these superficial connections and that sort of thing. Now, there is some differences. They don't fully ignore the differences the way a mythicist might ignore the differences up there. They sometimes, a lot of times, they acknowledge the differences, but they acknowledge it as an afterthought, not as a reason to deny the genre. And what they'll do is they'll have some kind of explanation to try to account for it, some sort of ad hoc explanation. There's no evidence behind it to account for why these differences are there. In order to hold to those differences at the same time while thinking the similarities support the part of this genre of myth. And of course, obviously, I disagree with that very much. It is I do consider it a form of mythicism. Because, like I said, they argue like a mythicist. They do believe that Genesis 1 through 11 is of the genre of myth, and they come in different forms, but essentially they will argue similar to a mythicist, except they argue it with Genesis chapters 1 through 11. And so this is a form of mythicism, but there are some fundamental differences as well between them and a hardcore mythicist. So I don't want you to think that they're exactly the same as mythicists or mythicism. There are some differences and so forth. But there are also some similarities as well. Well, what about Genesis 1 through 11? What genre is it? I believe Genesis 1 through 11 is of the genre of historical narrative. We have historical narrative, including historical narrative that's been written by Hebrews, so including both in and out of the Bible. So we can actually contrast that with that, and it is of the same style as historical narrative. For one thing, it is not written in poetic narrative. This is even agreed by Craig in his book over here. His book right here, In Quest of the Historical Adam. He agrees that this is not poetic narrative, except where people are quoted. Like in case of Adam seeing his wife for the first time, he says, "This is bone in my bone, flesh in my flesh." Or when Lamach's boast happened in chapter 4 of Genesis. Those are just the only blocks of poetry at all. And it's only when people cited that it's poetry. If it was poetic narrative, it'd be poetic throughout the entire narrative. So that's the only places where poetry is even referenced. The most prominent feature of poetic narrative is parallelisms, which is very lacking in Genesis chapters 1 through 11. Now, you got people like Joel Anderson and Bill Craig in this movement would argue this is not poetic narrative, which is interesting because in poetic narrative, figurative language in the form of poetry, of course, would abound. It would be the rule, not the exception. Where in historical narrative, the exact opposite would happen. It would be the exception, not the rule, and any figures of speech would be heavily contextualized. So the interesting thing is that that these people, some of these people in this movement, such as, like I said, Joe Anderson and Bill Craig, would say this is not poetic narrative, but most of the ancient Near Eastern literatures they're pointing to are written in poetic narrative. So that's interesting too. That's a major stylistic differences. And there are actually lots of other differences as well. And you can read these literature if you want to. I'm not going to show it to you. I've done it. I showed it on, I think, part 1 of my debate review between Ken Hovind and Joel Anderson. I showed some of these literatures out. I do have them on my computer. The style is very different. All you have to do is read them and you can see the styles are different. Historical narrative, in Hebrew historical narrative, they often use a series of vav consecutives, especially in reference to like a sequence of events. In Genesis 1 to the very beginning of chapter 2, we see a series of vav consecutives being used there. one after another. And we know this because it's connected to the Vav, the letter in Hebrew is connected to the Hebrew word for said, which is a verb. And so you wind up with a verb form, logito. And the series of logitos are found here. And so that indicates historical narrative. We also see the way in which they use Vavs in other places, like in a series of Toledos, which also present evidence for it being historical narrative, because the kinds of information that are presented here, they're not found in myth literature or in any kind of poetic narrative for that matter, because it tells how old somebody was when someone was born, how old they were when they died. Also, the very presence of Toledos, which is irrelevant information, would not have been used in a fictional story, because irrelevant information would bog down the story, especially poetic narrative, because poetic narrative tries to get to the point of the story. So you got that also. And of course you got the Vav consecutive connecting Genesis chapter 11 to chapter 12. You got the smooth transition into chapter 12. People in this movement would agree that chapters 12 to 50 is historical narrative. And there's not a hint or a change in genre at all. There's no sign of it at all. It just kind of smoothly transitions into chapter 12. And so you got all of these things that point to it being historical narrative. That beyond question, it's historical narrative. It's in the same style that the other books of history are written in, like 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Just compare chapter 5 and chapter 11 of the Toledos of Genesis 5 and 11, to Genesis 25, 1st Chronicles 1. It's written in the same style of literature. And you could tell it's written in the same style of literature. But when you compare it to ancient Near Eastern literature, as I have, they're not the same style. They're very different styles. Alright. Alright. I'm looking at my notes. All right, let's talk about what is a myth. A myth is essentially a fictional story that is believed by the is true as by the culture who adopts it, and about the past, about explaining things in the present using past stories that are untrue. They may or may not contain deities. A lot of them do, but that's irrelevant whether they contain deities or not. But they're trying to explain things that happen in the present. As a body of literature, they are literally composed of these stories concerning past events about that are fictional, that are being presented. They're not exactly being presented as history as much as explanations. Okay? That's ultimately what a myth is. And the myth literature is just simply the body of literature that composes these stories of. This is not what we see in Genesis 1 to 11. They obviously they did more than just, it's not an explanation to explain things per se, although they may account for things. But it's more or less a true story about what actually took place in the past, what God has actually did in creating the world, what man did with the fall, which by the way is that opposite order which we see in ancient Near Eastern literature, because in ancient Near Eastern literature they often start out with a chaos monster or a state of chaos, and then it goes on like that. And we see the other literatures, even outside of ancient Near Eastern literature, it starts this way. But the Bible is the exact opposite. It starts off in a state of things that are good. God created everything good. Good is used like 7 different times, with the last one being very good. So, I mean, this is very, very important. And then when we get to man, he creates man, he's good. And then all of a sudden he sins, and sin gets brought into the world, and that messed everything up. And which brought about the result of the flood. This is exact opposite order the way we see in ancient Near Eastern literature. There's no doubt that the wealth of evidence supports the fact that this is historical narrative and not the myth literature at all. Now, what if you are exposed to this kind of thinking? It's wrong. It's exegetically wrong. It could be morally wrong. It could actually lead to some heretical views, such as denying the fall of Moses, for example, in Genesis chapter 3. Some important stuff is brought up by the New Testament writers. We look at the New Testament writers, they cited Genesis as history, as literal history. So I think that this whole theory of theirs is very dangerous, exegetically, rhetorically, truthfully, involving truth, epistemologically, I should say, but it involves truth, knowledge. Yeah, it's possible there could be some moral issues involved as well. It's even an evangelical issue. There are evangelists like Pine Creek, or atheists like Pine Creek, that is opposed to Christianity and is using this to attack the gospel with it. I saw a video the other day where he presented that with Craig's mytho-history thesis. Now, granted, Craig's mytho-history thesis is false, and granted, Pine Creek's arguments were heavily fallacious. But, just the same, they are going to use these. So, I don't think that it's productive for Christians to think that this kind of mentality, this kind of belief system, this kind of belief, where it says, oh, there's some kind of myth in the Bible, no matter how you want to define the word myth, I don't think that's productive at all, especially for evangelism. So if you are a Christian or even an evangelical Christian, understand something. This is completely at odds with everything that we're trying to do as Christians. Everything that Jesus commanded us to do. We ought not do that. So my advice to you is, if you know somebody that is partaking this thesis or even considering it, talk them out of it. Okay? If you're being talked into it or in danger of considering it, run away from it. Get away from it. It is not a good theory. It is a theory that you would have to oppose all of the evidence to the contrary. And personally, I want to be on the side of truth. I don't care if that makes me unpopular. I don't care if that makes me well liked by people. I don't care. What I care about is truth. And I care about the souls of people that could be affected by this. So that's just my word on this. It's a short video. I'm not going to even really edit this video. I got a few things in it that I would mind editing out that I made a mistake on that I had to back up, but I'm just going to let it fly because at the end of the day, I'm going to hurry up and get this video out there. It's going to be a short video, and plus I'm still editing the other video that I haven't got out yet, part 2 of my debate review with between the debate between Ken Hovind and Dr. Anderson, and also don't forget that January 12th we're going to be doing an interview with Dr. Jason Lau, and I'm not going to be making any videos during that time after I upload. Excuse me. After I upload not this video, but the video with the debate review. After I upload that one, I'm not going to be doing any more videos until I interview Dr. Jason Lau, because I want to get ready for that interview. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be on the Genesis controversy. You're going to see here, and I'll see you then. Until then, stay in the know.